My name is Dr. Bedel Karia. I'm calling from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Okay.
And I'm also Executive Director of Somali Foreign Service Institute.
Okay.
I would like to ask the professor and other guests if you can let Somalia and Somalis to settle their differences in traditional way. It could be fine, but there are international communities who have third-party interest in the Republic of Somalia. We need Somalia and Somalis to understand and settle their political differences before the international community engage.
Let's get that. Let's get that to the professor right now before we take a break.
Well, there is nothing traditional about the conflict that we have. It's not the old sort of a pre-colonial traditional sort of a conflict. And he's certainly right. The questioner is certainly right. But what matters here, when the Somalis were able to sort out their things under the Union of Islamic Courts in 2006, there was peace across the country without the deployment of the United Nations or anybody else. But the international community would not allow that to happen. So this is the best second chance. Hopefully, this is the first step in that second chance. And the United Nations has to bring to the table enough resources and sanctions against all parties to be able to make sure that they respect the very agreements which they have signed. If that doesn't happen, and if they tell the Somalis, you go ahead and do your own thing, well, then they wouldn't have come to where they are if they were waiting for the UN to tell them that. So I think there's a very, very critical role for the United Nations to play, and that they have to begin to raise the resources to mobilize the troops to get in there long before the 120 days, so that the Ethiopians can be told to respect the United Nations Security Council resolutions, which they have violated quite frequently.
All right, we're going to take. Welcome back. We're discussing the prospect of peace in Somalia. And joining us, we have Dr. Abdi Samatar, a professor at the University of Minnesota. He's in Minneapolis. Also, Awale Kulane, who's heading the new Somali Youth League in London. And here in Washington, D.C. is Sadia Adan, who heads the Somali Diaspora Network. And if I can get this to Mr. Awale Kulane, an email that came in from Australia. And it's on the issue of intervention, which we touched on just before we went to the break. Hamdi Ahmed in Melbourne in Australia writes in saying, this continuing apparent chaos is a way of Somalis saying we will not collectively bow to outsiders no matter what situation we are in. Leave it to us alone. After all, dignity has no price tag. There is a Somali saying, don't eat the dead because you feel hungry. Last year, when it appeared close to sorting itself out, outsiders involved themselves, and it took Somalia to a new dimension of fighting. The solution can only come from the Somalis. And I have to ask you, in your opinion, I know you're fairly supportive of the US approach to dealing with Somalia. How you feel about the idea that many Somalis reject the idea of outsiders, as our caller did, interfering as they see it with the affairs of Somalia, that Somalis should be left to get on sorting out their own affairs?
I think Somalis should take responsibility in their affairs more than the international community getting involved in Somalia. But Somalia doesn't live in a political island. Somalia is involved in the international world. And again, I feel that we Somalis have to take responsibility, like Sadia said, of what is happening. But the American intervention and the UN intervention, for a long time we've been saying that we want the world to intervene. We want the world to look at our side. We want the world to take part in reconciling Somalis. And now the world is doing this, and then we were saying that we don't want you. It doesn't make sense. So it needs the Somalis, it needs the international community, and it needs everybody who wants to reconcile in that area to get involved in it. I respect Sadia's point, and I see it as Somalis taking responsibility of resolving themselves, and as well as taking the opportunity that the world offers to respect the territorial integrity of Somalia and the institution building of Somalia, so that we can get out of this scenario. We haven't done it for the last 17 years, and this time it's a hope that we can get out of it as best as we can. So we need everybody's help, and the Somalis, more importantly, to get out of the situation that we are in at the moment.
Now, before we get to our caller, let me just ask Sadia Adan, who's with us here as well, the effort you're making in trying to get the expat Somali community together to try and provide support for people back home. How successful is that, and what difference can the expat community make, the diaspora?
Well, that has been successful in so many ways. What has happened is the Somalis in the diaspora have done so much for the Somali people inside Somalia. The UNDP has estimated 1.5 million US dollars goes into Somalia annually, and that is not even, it's not included what has not been official. So the Somali community in the diaspora has a vested interest establishing peace in Somalia. What we have done is reaching out to other organizations, like-minded grassroots advocacy organizations, to establish and bring voices together. 8 organizations have come together under the Somali cause as far as Canada. And what we do is we do fundraisings for the displaced outside Mogadishu, where we send out and make sure it reaches them in the form of food.
The key thing is that Somalia itself is so factionalized. With the diaspora, presumably you have the same level of factionalization, you have the same number of different factions. How do you get them together to put aside the differences?
The issue, true, the problem did exist, but after the illegal invasion of Ethiopian troops back in 2006, December, that has changed very much, and that has made our work a lot easier. Since the invasion of 2006, you have 2.6 million people on the verge of starvation. You have 1.5 million displaced people outside Mogadishu and around the nation, and you have about 7,000 people killed that are not being talked about in this particular conference. And that was the saddest thing, because as they were signing the agreement in Djibouti and they were celebrating and everything, the Ethiopian troops were shelling one of the biggest markets in Somalia and the lifeline of Mogadishu and killing innocent civilians, and these issues are not being addressed. And I think this is one of the reasons why this agreement will have problem unless the international community takes another look and truly addresses the crises that are on hand on the ground.
Let's get a call in from DC, Washington DC here. Good to hear from you. Waisani, go ahead, please.
First, I'm going to...
Hi, go ahead.
First, I'm going to thank Al Jazeera.
Thank you.
Second, I'm going to ask you, the professor, do you think that Somali leaders come together and solve their problems without foreign countries and foreign leaders?
I think the question, Professor, was can it be solved without outside intervention?
Well, the Somalis have demonstrated a number of times that they can lead their country democratically, and for instance, they were the first African Democrats to change presidents through the ballot consistently. And they have tried to demonstrate that they can restore peace. In 2006, one significant proportion, nearly 2/3 of the south of the country were under the Islamic courts, and peace was restored. But I think what I will argue here in response to the questioner is that there needs to be collaboration between Somalis who feel for their own people, such as those who created the peace in 2006, an international community that's focused on democracy and sustaining the livelihoods of human beings like Somalis who are struggling to do so. I think there are possibilities in which that kind of a collaboration can take place. The Alliance for the Re-liberation of Somalia has made significant efforts to liberate the country, and I think they are quite committed to that, despite the fact that there may be some elements who are opposed to this particular proposition that the United Nations has put together. The key here, in my opinion, since the international community derailed the peace process in Somalia in 2006, they are morally held to support a project in which peace can be restored to places like Mogadishu and give the Somali people a chance to rally around that. If the UN doesn't bring the assets on the table, then this will be another agreement which will be falling by the wayside.
Okay, we've got on the line from Michigan, Ahmed. Ahmed, what would you like to ask?
Okay, for the past 18 years, my country has civil war. We have witnessed several countries that had civil war, and then immediately the United Nations took action, and then they were resolved. So, what's the world doing? Why are they watching Somalia? On the other hand, who invited Ethiopia into our country when we are waiting?
Ahmed, let me. Well, one thing I could put this to Sadia Aden. Why has there been such a lack of outcry in this? You know, I mean, Mohammed Adaw mentioned at the beginning that focus on Sudan and so on has taken some of the attention away. But why has there been such a lack of outcry? What's been going on?
That is the question that's the $6 million question. Now we realize, and the UN has said, a lot of other analysts have said that the situation in Somalia is worse than Darfur. But still, a lot of people are not paying attention. And the reason is because mainstream media in the United States and the Western countries have refused to touch on this issue. And another reason is that I wanted to talk about, and I'm glad this caller has brought up, is the issue of the UN. UN has sanctioned the illegal invasion of Somalia by the Ethiopian troops. The United States, our government of Washington, has given a tacit support. So the Somalis on the ground who have been suffering from this inhumane shelling of the Ethiopian troops have a question: how can those who supported sanctioned the invasion, who have given tacit support, at the same time give us something to get rid of Ethiopia, because like the professor said and is in the agreement, and Addo has reported earlier, there is a if, which is when there is a sufficient number of UN troops, and that, who decides that? That's where the question is coming from, and the concerns of the Somalis.
Well, I want to say, we've run out of time, unfortunately, but Sadia Adin, Awale Kulani, I'm so sorry we're out of time. Professor, thank you for joining us as well. We have to end here, but thank you for being with us with your questions there. And don't forget, if you have any comments on this show or thoughts on pressing issues around the world, send emails to riz@aljazeera.net. We'll see you next time.